advertising career at Volkswagen in UK.
Yes.
So you had always thought of becoming a copywriter while being a client?
Well, yes, that was when, I'll tell you a little story. I had a boss who was the head of the advertising department. His name was Alan Priest. His son now is a very famous young creative here, Ben Priest. He runs an agency called Adam and Eve, which has recently merged with Dordain Bernbach, funnily enough. Anyway, Alan Priest, Ben's father, was my boss. And when I went into the advertising department, as I said, I didn't really know much about it, but he had a bookcase. And I asked him, what are those books, Alan, in that bookcase? And he said to me, they're New York art directors' annuals. I said, what's a New York art director's annual? And he said, well, every year in America, the art director, the industry, the best people in the industry get together and vote the best advertising. I said, could I borrow them? He said, you can borrow them one at a time. And each time you bring one back, you can take another one. So that's what I did. And over a course of a month or so, I took these out and read them and got a magnifying glass to read the copy. And that really sold me. If the VW ads got me slightly interested, reading all those ads in those annuals actually convinced me that eventually, if the opportunity arose, I wanted to become a writer.
You said that Bob Levinson was your copywriter hero, is that right?
Obviously, the person who was close by, whose work I read and mimicked at first, was David Abbott, because it was right on my doorstep. So that was really my first big influence. But then once I sort of got into the Volkswagen campaign a bit more deeply, seeing the American work, especially the stuff that was in the annuals, other people, came on the horizon. Bob Levinson, of course, and also Ed McCabe, who's ballsy kind of style. I mean, I always remember that wonderful Vespa ad he wrote, a motorcycle it ain't. Mm-hmm. So I liked his work too. Carl Alley's agency as well did a lot of good work. Emil Gugano later. So all those American writers and art directors became a sort of model to me. It was interesting too to see. I'm a guy with an Italian family name, seeing how many Italian family names there were in American advertising. And some years later I met Jerry Della Femina.
Of course.
And he met me and he said, oh, what do you do? I said, I'm a copywriter. He said, you're the only other Italian copywriter, he said, I've ever met. He said, in New York, they're all art directors.
That's true. Yeah. The copywriters are Jewish. Yeah.
Or Irish, some Irish.
Or Irish.
If I had to describe like Bob Levinson's copy style or yours, there's one phrase that I have in my head, and that's elegant thinking. I don't even know what you do, but it's so...
Oh, I don't know either, Ben. I always try and put myself in the position of the person who's I'm selling it to, really, or talking to, or trying to change an attitude. And I think, what would impress me? Why would I change my attitude? And I try and work out that, and then I try and put myself in their position with regard to, are they busy, are they quiet, is it somebody who's got 4 kids around them, they've really got a minute to think. You have to kind of be empathetic, and I think that's half of the battle with writing advertising. It's like, what was the thing, I think it was Bob or Bill said about, it's like writing a letter to an uncle you know but don't see very often, and then you put dear Bill at the front and whatever, and then you take that bit off, and then the copy will be about right. And I think that's true for an awful lot of pieces of copy. In terms of actually the problem solving, I don't know, I think it's a kind of thing, as time passes, you get older and learn things, obviously. That whole thing about empathy and what you feel would influence people, what influences you, what you respect about a product. You try and communicate that in a way that is believable and that people will remember. I think that's it.
Let's say you have to write a headline. How many headlines do you write Do you still write?
To get one, you mean?
Yeah,
Oh,
one you really
sometimes,
like.
well, it depends. I mean, sometimes, also it depends on the material. I mean, we've just done this print campaign for prostate cancer, and some of the ads, as soon as you see some, you hear some information or whatever, they write themselves. I mean, one of the things I learned was that Afro-Caribbean men are 3 times more likely to get prostate cancer than white men. So I wrote a headline which said, "A cancer so evil it is racially prejudiced." I mean, but you get that from, you don't have to dress it up very much. You can, turn it to your
But
advantage.
again, it's such an elegant way of putting it. Such a artistic, or it's like a
Well, Tony always used to say, he was a hard boss, Tony Brigham. You used to go in there sometimes and you'd look at it and go, He said, "Very nice, Mark, but it reads a little bit like an advertising headline." That would be his criticism of it. You had to write headlines that didn't read like headlines. He loved it if you asked a question or, made a statement. But he didn't like what, a lot of people just churn out as chinky headlines, smart plays on words that don't really have any depth. He was very much a person who believed in finding a powerful way to expose a truth. If you look at Tony's work in the copybook or anywhere really, I mean, you look at all his ads, they don't, if you take the headlines, they're not like headlines. I mean, he did a wonderful ad for British Army officers, recruitment.
Yeah.
It was just a tank in the high street of
Exactly.
Afghanistan.
Exactly.
And the headline was, "Next question mark."
I know. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's very powerful. But what is it? It's not a headline at all, really, is it? But that's the clever thing about it. That was the thing he was very good at, and very good at drumming into the likes of me who work for him. What I tend to do when I write is write everything I can. Get it all out of my system. And then I look at it and what's the important bits, so I get rid of the bits that are less important. And then I try and boiling it down, like when you're cooking, you make a sauce and you try and do it like that. But I always find the best way to start is to write everything, get it all out. And then you're working with all the ingredients. The awful thing is if you try and write tightly, I find it difficult to write tightly straight off, because then I think, but I haven't mentioned that, If I mention everything, and then I cut it back.
You want to reduce it, like a minestrone, exactly. Yeah.
So then it goes back smaller, and you know that the other things that you could have mentioned, you've already got rid of. So you feel more confident. I think directness is one of the things, and trying to find an attractive and endearing way of being direct, rather than a blunt way of being direct. I think
like an oblique way, or
but still being direct, not sort of messing around and hiding things and stuff. Just finding a charming way of being direct to people that captures everybody. Because people haven't got a lot of time. You're an intrusion in their lives. And so you just have to make it as charming as you can. Also, I don't want to pollute the landscape or the magazines or the books or whatever with ugly or unthoughtful advertising. I'd like to try and do things that are nice and that in some small way are pleasant or enhancing the world, rather than that's the awful thing about a lot of posters. When you see really ugly posters, you think it's ruining the landscape, whereas a nice poster can be quite uplifting.